Okay, welcome back, and continuing on from our last video, we created an alpha channel for our eye. So that was just creating a black and white image. Black would be transparent and white would be opaque. So this is for the outer shell of our eye, so we can see the pupil when we start to create that. So I've just created and saved out the TGA. And this is just a temporary one again, like I said before. It's just a temporary alpha because when we do the final head texture, the alpha will be a part of that head texture, so it'll be in the alpha channel. So just saving that out. And then we'll go into max, and in our opacity channel here, we'll go to that bitmap and we'll find our temporary alpha channel that we created. We'll hit open. It'll do that black and white thing while it thinks about it, and you can see now that the outer shell is no longer visible. So that means we can now go in and we can start to paint our eye texture. So before I do that, I'm just cleaning up my layers again. So I've created all the clothing, I've put into one group, I've color coded it again, and I've created a new group for the eye. So I'm going to create two circles here. I'll turn back on my UV wire so I can see what I'm doing, and I'm going to create one colored circle for the iris and one for the pupil. So just using the circle marquee tool, I'm holding Shift and Alt in order to create a perfect circle. And you can see if I save that and go back into max, you can see that apply. Now her pupils are a little bit big there, so I'm going to bring it into about there. And yep, so that's much better. Okay, so you want the when the eye is naturally relaxed, the iris will be clipped almost from at the top and the bottom, so you will never see a perfect circle unless she's surprised. So again, just for the pupil there, making sure that's showing up in the right spot in max. I'm going to create it just a little bit bigger. So just using the transform tool, so that's Control T, and again holding Shift to make sure, and Alt to scale it out in a uniform way. And now I'm happy with that. I'm going to switch to my smudge tool. I will clone my, no, I won't clone that yet. I will just bring down my scattering on my spacing, I should say. Bring down the spacing on the smudge tool and the size just to make it a little bit smaller. And I'm going to start to smudge out the pupil. So just bringing it out, so starting from the edge of the pupil and dragging it out to the edge of the eye. So this is just to create that muscle, the look of the actual iris. So the iris itself is actually a group of muscles which will contract and expand depending on the amount of light that is hitting our eye. So, and the pupil itself is just a hole within the eye that allows the light to pass through and hit the back of our cornea, which creates the image. So what we're doing here is creating the look of the muscle group of the iris, so just adding to that feel. So I'm just going to go around the entire circle and do that. So again, pressing R on the keyboard to rotate the canvas, and escape to go out of the rotation. Okay, so that's starting to look pretty good here. If I move out, I can see it a little bit better. So just going to pull it out and push it back in some places just to get it a little bit more varied. It was starting to look a little bit too even around the edges there. Once that's done, I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to fill it with white, so got the selection of the iris by holding Control and hovering over the checker map and clicking, so that gives me the selection, and then I filled it with white. I'm then going to go to Noise, Add Noise, and making sure it's uniform, I'm going to add a small amount of noise. So I'm going to also make sure it's monochromatic, so it's just black and white. So I don't want any color in there. So, and I'm just going to bring it up to quite a high amount, just to make it a little bit darker. Again, it's up to you to just experiment and find out what kind of look you're looking for. Once that's done, with the circle still selected, I'm going to go to Blur, Radial Blur, and make sure it's zoom and at best. And that'll basically shoot everything out. Okay. So it doesn't look like much at the moment. So let's go to Filter and then Liquify. And we can zoom in here. Just I'm using my scroll wheel there, or you could use the zoom tool. And with a small small brush size, I'm just going to go in and try and add a bit of a wave to these radial blur marks. So just bringing the brush size and the pressure down, and then I'm just going to go back and forth over the lines, just to put a bit of a wave in there, a bit of variation. That's the word I was looking for. A bit of variation in the lines of the eye. Okay, so once I'm happy with that, I'm going to hit OK to confirm and apply it. And then I'm going to go into my layer blend and select multiply. So you can see now that that's starting to create kind of the look that we're wanting. So I'm going to grab the selection of the iris again, just by holding Control and selecting. I'll then go to Select, Inverse, and I'll hit Delete to get everything that's outside of the iris gone. I'm then going to play with my layer blend modes until I can find something that I'm happy with. I've used overlay here, so just go through and find the style that you want. I'm just also going to name this iris muscles, just to give it a name. You can call it whatever you want, iris lines, whatever. I'll spell it correctly. That could be a good thing. And I'll duplicate the pupil. So I've just turned off my iris muscles at the moment, so just to so I can see what I'm doing here. On the pupil copy, I've opened up my hue and saturation. You can do that by either using the pull down as I just did, or you can hit Control U on the keyboard. And then I'm going to make sure colorize is checked, and then I'm going to play with the hue and saturation a little bit. So I'm trying to find a color that will be complementary to the brown and that can be seen in normal people's eyes. So I've gone for a bit of an amber look, and then again using the brush, the smudge tool, I'm going to drag this right out to the edge almost of the eye. So I'm not trying to be neat or tidy or anything, I'm just dragging that out to make it look almost like a hairy sun. Okay, so once I'm happy with that, I'm going to again use the liquify filter on this, and just going back and forth over that again as well, just to make it a little bit more wavy and a little bit more visually interesting. So once I've done that, okay, yep, that's starting to look good. Might just change the color a little bit on this. I'm not quite sure I like how that's working. Yep, okay. I'll rename that. Just call it Iris Color Inner, and I'll make a copy of it. Okay, with that copy active, I'm going to rotate it, so just hitting Control T on the keyboard. I'll undo that because I had the white selected, so it was too hard to see what I was doing. And just rotating it a little bit to create a bit more variation in the iris itself. Okay, and you can change the color of the copy if you'd like. I've decided I didn't like the extra there, so I'm going to delete that layer. You can put in more if you like. It wasn't really adding much for me, so I've just took that off. I mean, you can do that as many times as you like as well. So now I'm trying to find, I want to put a bit of green in the eye, almost like a hazel eye has. So I've picked the color. I've then, again with my selection of the iris active, I'm going to go to Edit, Stroke, and I'm going to use center, and I'm going to use quite a big width of, so considering the size of the canvas, 4 is a bit too small. I'll undo that, and I'll make that, yeah, 8. There we go. Now don't worry if it's gone over the center, we can delete that like we did the radial blur lines. But I'm going to call this Iris Color Outer, I guess. And we're going to do the same thing with this as we did with the pupil. So instead of going from the inside out, this time we're going to go from the outside in. And again, once we're happy with that, we take that into our liquefier, and we can start to make the lines all wiggly. We can then clean up our edges by selecting, bringing back our selection and inverting it, and then pressing delete to get rid of the outside. Okay, so I'm going to turn that off, just hiding that layer for a minute, and then I'm going back into the pupil layer that I created before. So the first color, the inner color, and I'm going to apply a drop shadow. So going layer, style, layer, style, drop shadow, maybe a bit of bevel and embossed. I'm just going to play with that a little bit. So again, it'll depend on how big your eye is on the texture to how much how big the bevel can be, but you can see it pops it out and makes it look a little bit more like muscles or a depth in the eyeball there. So again, we'll do the same thing with the outer color. I'm just changing the color here on that as well, just using Control U on that, so I wasn't quite liking the green. I've duplicated the inner color this time, so the color inner, and I've shrunk it down and I've rotated it slightly. And playing with the color again, you can see how it adds a little bit more to the eye itself. Okay, so once that's done, I can turn on my radial blur lines again to see how that's looking, and it's quite lightened up the eye quite a bit, hasn't it? So I've duplicated the outer rim and I'm rotating that a little bit. I'm going to bring down the color just a little bit more and play with that. And again, playing with the opacity as well. So zooming out to seeing how that looks, because obviously you're not going to see it all the time up this close. And then just, duplicating and adding. So I think I scaled this one out a little bit as well, just to add a bit of color variation. There we go. Again, since that's gone over the edge of the iris, we'll have to delete that as well. But I'm just going to play with that. No, it didn't turn out right. Okay. I'm going to go with that for now. So I've created a new layer and I've put the iris as a mask on it. So it doesn't matter what I do this time, the mask will occlude it. So again, I've turned the mask off so I can see how this is working. To do that, I hold Shift and click on the mask. You'll get the big red cross through it. To bring it back, just hold Shift and click on it again. So yep, you can see, oh dear, it seems to have applied that to my actual mask, so that's not good. So I'll delete that mask and I'll try again. So I'll create it the same way as I just did, but this time I'll do it before I put the mask on. So you can see how it's created the shadow from the outside of the eye in, and I'm going to do that again just to make that a little bit darker, but this time I'm going to make it a little bit smaller just to get that ring on around the edge of the eye. Now you can see with the pupil off it looks quite strange, but I'm going to also add another shadow here on the inner. So just getting the selection and stroking that and then blurring it out to add to the fact that the eye is curving inwards towards the pupil. Okay, I'm going to bring that inner shadow right down as well, so it's just adding a hint of depth to the eye. And then I'm going to play with the colors a little bit as well. So it's quite a light eye at the moment. It's not really what I want, since Selena's eyes are quite dark. So I'm going to play with some of the layer blend modes here on our radial layer to see what I can get. Doesn't seem to be doing what I want, so I'll have a look in max and see what that looks like. Again, I still think it's quite light, so if I open up, yeah, so you can see it's almost a grey, her eyes as well. So I've gone and used the wrong colour. So for the iris colour down the bottom, I'll make a copy and then I'll fill it by preserving my transparency. So that's the little checker button at the top there. And I'll just use a fill, so Control Delete will fill it. And now I can go back and change all the colors to match that eye. So I'm just bringing these ones down, so I'm not disliking the colors that I've already done. I just think they're a bit too strong, so I'm just going through and seeing how that works. Okay, so just tidying up my layers there as well. Yep, I think I kind of like that. Might just play around with some of these a little bit to see what I can get. So again, this is why we keep everything as much as we can on separate layers. So if I do change my mind, I can go back and I can just color shift, or I can just tweak things really simply rather than having to redo every layer again. Okay, I'm pretty happy with how that's turned out and the colors that are working together nicely, so I can move on to the rest of the eye now. So I've created a new group and I've called it Iris. So now I'm going to create a new layer within the eye group, and this will be the outside of the eye, so the white area of the eye. I've darkened off the white. Again, I don't want it to be pure white. This will just make the eye bloom, and it'll look rather odd if it's sitting in the head and it's super shiny. So I've just used a slight darker grey, so not pure white, not too grey, and then I'm going to use the dark blood red colour that I used for the base of my skin tone, and I'm going to use that on the outer of the eye and bring it in towards the centre. So we do want to bring it close to the iris, but we don't want to get it too close to the iris. So if we have a look in Max, we can see that there's just a little bit of red around the corners of the eyes, so, and that's kind of what we're going for. Once that's done, and once I'm happy with that, I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to use the same brush I used to create the veins, and I'm going to create little veins on the eye, so from the outside towards the iris. So you don't want too many of these, and you definitely don't want them too close to the iris. It'll just make her look like she's got bloodshot eyes, she's had a night out on the town or something. She's just, yeah, a bit too red. So you just want to bring a few of these in, and you want to come closer to the eyes, but not too close. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I was going to mess with the layer blend modes to see if I could get something that I'd like, but I think it would be better with a bit of a drop shadow on it. So just going to my layer styles and adding a bit of a drop shadow, so just a very small one, just to make the veins look like they actually are veins and that they're sitting on top of the eyeball. And maybe a bit of a bevel and emboss as well. So again, just a very small amount, just to add a little bit of depth to the vein. Now that I've done that, I'm actually going to go in and I'm going to bring down the opacity on that to make them a little less pronounced. So again, a little less like she has bloodshot eyes. I'm also changing the colors to match my color layer, the color of my layer, so it's all color coded for me. And I'll create a new group from the layers for the outside of the eye. I'm just going to call it eyeball. Make sure that it is in my actual eye layer, and make sure that it's not obscuring the iris, so just bringing the iris back on top of that. So I'm also going to go in and I'm going to add just a little bit of yellow. Not too much, just a little bit. Again, just using a scatter brush just to go in and just add a little bit of variation to the eyeball. Okay, so that's the end of the eyeball. We'll continue on with our texture painting in the next video.